In the remote and sleepy town of Banemore, a new teacher arrived. Miss Eleonora Vespertine was sophisticated, poised, and cultured. She exuded an air of elegance that seemed out of place in this humble Georgian town, a place where time moved slower and secrets festered like old wounds. But the townsfolk, charmed by her grace, never questioned her motives. They were too delighted by her presence to suspect anything sinister.
It will be good for our daughter to learn some culture,
The attorney's wife remarked to the pastor's wife.
And our boy may finally acquire some table manners.
The pastor's wife responded with a hopeful smile. Soon after Miss Vespertine's arrival, school was called into session in the old church. The children returned home with glowing reports of their new teacher. She was enchanting, teaching them not only reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also manners, diction, and a peculiar sense of curiosity. The parents were thrilled, believing they had found a rare gem. But not everyone shared their enthusiasm. The town drunkard, a scruffy man named Tobias, had darker tales to tell.
"That woman ain't natural,"
he muttered to the blacksmith, waving a bottle of whiskey for emphasis.
"I seen her out in the woods after dark, dancing round a bonfire and chanting in some strange tongue."
"Nonsense,"
the blacksmith replied, his hammer striking the anvil with rhythmic precision.
"They say she's got an altar in her room, and it ain't for the Almighty,"
Tobias insisted, his breath sour with drink.
"You're drunk.
Said the blacksmith, lifting the hot iron as a barrier.
Go home and sleep it off."
Tobias left, but he continued to spread his wild stories. Over the following weeks, a change came over the children. The usual pranks and laughter diminished, replaced by an unsettling silence. When they did misbehave, their actions were darker, more sinister. Items began to disappear from homes, jewelry, tools, money. When the children spoke back to their parents, their voices carried a cold, hard edge, and they refused to apologize.
My daughter lied to me the other day.
The attorney's wife confided to the pastor's wife.
I saw her punch her younger brother and steal an apple, and she denied it to my face. She practically called me a liar.
The games the children play in the woods frighten me.
The pastor's wife admitted.
They chant in strange languages and move in eerie ritualistic patterns.
Could it be something they're learning at school?
The attorney's wife asked.
Surely not. Teacher is such a sweet, sophisticated lady,
Said the pastor's wife, but they exchanged uneasy glances. Tobias, however, was convinced.
"That teacher is turning the young'uns to the devil,"
he proclaimed, his voice echoing through the streets.
"Don't be ridiculous,"
the preacher said, confronting him in front of the mercantile.
"I ain't ridiculous. You're blind."
Tobias retorted.
"That teacher ought to be burned at the stake, like the witches in Salem."
The preacher, pale with anger, ordered Tobias out of his sight, but the drunkard's words lingered in his mind. The children's behavior grew increasingly disturbing, almost as if they were possessed. The preacher resolved to investigate. That day came sooner than expected. The very next Monday, the preacher's young son fell ill, and his mother kept him home. When the preacher returned for lunch, his wife ran to him, her face ashen.
I heard him chanting in his room.
She gasped.
He was saying the Lord's Prayer backwards.
The preacher clutched his Bible, his skin prickling with dread. There was no place the boy could have learned such a thing except at school. At that moment, the attorney's wife burst in.
Quick, Pastor, quick! Tobias is running through town with a torch, talking about burning down the school. The children are still inside.
The preacher raced out, the two women close behind. They arrived to see smoke billowing from the church. Parents fought the flames with wet sacks and buckets of water, but the fire raged with supernatural intensity. From the far side of the building, Tobias could be heard cackling madly, unrepentant. The screams of the trapped children and their teacher filled the air, mingling with the crackle of the inferno. The preacher thought he heard Miss Vespertine's laughter within the flames as it became clear no one could be saved. The fire burned for hours, leaving nothing but ash and ruin. Grieving parents sifted through the debris, seeking something to bury. Tobias disappeared from town, his mission against the perceived works of Satan complete. Miss Vespertine's charred body was buried deep beneath a brick tomb. The children were laid to rest under simple wooden crosses. Only the preacher's young son survived that fateful autumn. To this day, voices can be heard in the graveyard of burnt church, chanting in unknown tongues. Apparitions are seen, shadowy figures roaming the graves at night. They say that a brick from Miss Vespertine's tomb can ignite flames, a chilling reminder of the night the devil came to Banemore.
It was a night like any other for Evelyn, who worked the late shift at the hospital. Her drive home usually offered a quiet respite from the bustling chaos of her job. But this night, she found herself driving down a barren country road, the kind where shadows play tricks on the mind, and the trees seem to whisper secrets as you pass by. The mist clung to the forest like a shroud, and the headlights of her old sedan barely pierced the thick fog. As she drove, the familiar chill of the night air crept into the car, but something else seemed to gnaw at her nerves, a sensation that she wasn't alone. She glanced at her rearview mirror and noticed a pair of headlights trailing about 50 feet behind her.
Unusual,
she thought.
I never see other cars on this road.
Shrugging off the eerie feeling, she continued on, trying to focus on the winding road ahead. But then, without warning, the car behind her honked, a single, sharp note that pierced the night.
What on earth?
Evelyn muttered.
Must have hit the horn by accident.
She kept driving, but the uneasy feeling in her stomach didn't subside. A minute later, the car honked again, twice this time. She glanced in the mirror and saw a man in the driver's seat, his face twisted in agitation, shouting something she couldn't make out.
Just another aggressive driver,
she thought, trying to convince herself as much as dismiss the situation. She was close to her turnoff now, eager to be rid of her unwanted companion. But then it happened again. 3 sharp blasts of the horn. Evelyn's patience snapped. She pulled into a small, dimly lit gas station at the side of the road, motioning for the car to follow. Her heart pounded as she got out, ready to confront the rude driver. The man pulled up beside her, rolling down his window. He looked pale, almost frantic.
Why have you been honking at me?
Evelyn shouted, her voice edged with frustration and a touch of fear.
I'm driving fine. There's nothing wrong. Stop being an asshole.
The man leaned out, his eyes wide with fear.
Lady, you don't understand. There's been a man in your back seat. Every time I honked, he ducked down. He had a knife. He was going to kill you. I just saved your life not once, not twice, but 3 times.
Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. She turned slowly towards her car, dread creeping up her spine. The back door of her sedan creaked open, and the night seemed to hold its breath. The shadows inside shifted, and a figure, cloaked in darkness, stepped out. The gas station's dim light fell on his face, a face twisted with malevolence, eyes glinting with predatory intent. A wicked grin spread across his lips as he brandished a long, glinting knife. The man who had followed her was right. He had saved her life. The would-be attacker lunged, but before he could reach her, the gas station attendant emerged with a baseball bat, swinging it with a desperate strength fueled by adrenaline and fear. The assailant crumpled to the ground unconscious. Evelyn staggered back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at the man who had honked at her savior, and saw the relief and lingering fear in his eyes.
Thank you,
she whispered, her voice trembling. That night, Evelyn learned that the mundane could turn to horror in an instant, that the roads we travel hold more than just physical dangers, and from then on, she always checked her back seat before driving off into the night.
Hidden in the shadows of a South Carolina plantation in the mid-19th century, a place where the veil between the seen and unseen was thin, and the air was thick with whispers of old hags and conjurers. The night, cloaked in inky darkness, held secrets that few dared to uncover, and the lantern light flickered with an otherworldly glow. According to the haunting tales of Jacob Stroyer, who was born into the chains of slavery in South Carolina in 1849, the world of the enslaved was filled with more than just the brutal reality of their existence. It was a world where the supernatural walked hand in hand with the mundane, where hags and conjurers wove their dark magic under the cover of night.
Imagine,
Jacob wrote,
the witches among us were thought to be those who toiled by our side every day. We called them old hags or jack-o'-lanterns. Both men and women, those who had grown old and strange-looking, were believed to be witches.
As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows over the plantation, the enslaved would gather in each other's cabins, huddled close against the night. The cabins, with their cracked wooden walls and thatched roofs, stood like sentinels against the encroaching darkness. Through the small windows, they would peer out over the vast open fields, their eyes searching the distance.
When they saw a distant light,
Jacob recounted,
that flickered and danced like a will-o'-the-wisp, they would whisper, "There is an old hag." If the light came from a direction where those suspected of witchcraft lived, the murmurs grew louder. "That looks like old Aunt Susan," one would say. "No, that looks like a man-hag," another would argue. "I think that looks like old Uncle Renty," a third would chime in. As the light vanished, a collective shiver would run through the gathered souls. "The witch has entered the plantation," they would say, changing shape to walk among us unnoticed. It mingles with us, speaking like any other person until those it wishes to bewitch retire to bed. Then, under the cloak of darkness, it reverts to its true form. The stories grew darker still. They claimed that these hags rode human beings like horses.
Jacob wrote, his words dripping with dread.
The spittle that ran down the cheek of a sleeper was the bridle the witch used to control them.
Without Bibles to shield them from these malevolent spirits, the enslaved turned to other means. They sprinkled cayenne pepper and salt in the corners of their cabins, drawing protective circles around their beds. The pungent aroma of the spices mingled with the earthy scent of the wooden floors, creating a barrier against the unseen terrors of the night. Jacob's account paints a vivid picture of a world where fear and folklore intertwined, where the oppressed found solace and explanation in the supernatural for the incomprehensible cruelties they endured. The tales of hags and conjurers were more than just stories. They were a reflection of the struggle to find meaning and protection in a world that offered none. So, as you walk through the darkened fields and hear the rustle of leaves whispering secrets, remember the hags and conjurers of Jacob Stroyer's world. Their lanterns flicker still, casting long shadows on the pages of history, illuminating the fears and hopes of those who lived through the darkest of times.
The marshlands of Coppertown were an eerie place by night, where mist slithered over the water and the reeds whispered secrets to the stars. After an unlucky day of hunting, I found myself stranded in that very marshland, without a lantern or a flashlight to guide me through the darkness. So, I settled beside a fallen log to rest until dawn. As I tossed and turned, the tale my great-uncle had spun for me long ago surfaced in my mind, filling the silence with its ghostly echoes. There was once a man named Rourke, notorious for his cruelty. He beat his wife and children, spreading misery wherever he went. As the years wore on, his wickedness consumed him. When Rourke finally died, his soul ascended to the gates of heaven, only to be turned away by St. Peter. Rejected, he descended to hell, but the devil barred the door.
Begone, wretch!
The devil snarled.
There is no place for you here.
How am I to find my way in this darkness?
Rourke demanded. The devil, with a malevolent grin, tossed him a molten ember.
Take this and wander the earth forevermore.
And so, Rourke returned to the marshlands, a cursed spirit with a fiery lantern, luring the unwary to their doom. As these thoughts swirled in my mind, I noticed a faint flickering light in the fog. "Is that you, Jack-o'-lantern?" I called out with forced bravado.
Jack.
A voice echoed back, twisted and eerie. My heart pounded as I clutched my rifle, the hairs on my arms standing on end. Was that an echo, or was someone out there with me? "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to mask my fear. I waved my rifle wildly. "Show yourself!"
Jack.
The voice hissed, now from a different part of the marsh. The light blinked on and off, like a malevolent beacon. A chill ran down my spine as I huddled against the log, seeking its solidity for comfort. The tale of Jack-o'-lantern no longer seemed like a mere story. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I strained to listen. Silence fell over the marsh, an oppressive stillness that amplified my terror.
Jack.
The voice whispered again, closer this time. The light blinked, casting eerie shadows that danced and vanished. I counted 10 heartbeats before it disappeared. The voice was moving closer. I held my breath, my instincts screaming at me to stay still, to not even breathe.
Jack.
The voice called, far off to my right now. The light blinked on and off. Just as I thought it was moving away, the silence grew even more suffocating. Not a whisper of wind, not a croak of a frog, not even the chirp of an insect.
Jack.
The voice hissed right in my ear. I turned slowly and found myself staring into the glowing red eyes and twisted, grinning face of Jack-o'-lantern. I screamed and swung my rifle, but missed. In blind panic, I ran, tripping over roots and stones, until I fell hard, my head striking a sharp rock. Stars exploded in my vision, and warm blood trickled down my face. But I couldn't stop. I had to get away. Rolling over, I tumbled into a deep, murky pool. The water closed over my head as I struggled against the ropey grasses that pulled at my limbs. My head broke the surface, and I gasped for air, treading water with trembling limbs and a throbbing skull. Jack-o'-lantern's laughter echoed through the mist.
Jack!
The voice hissed with delight. The light blinked on above me, blinding my eyes as horror froze my limbs. The grotesque face loomed closer, red eyes burning with malevolence. Pain from my bleeding head blurred my vision. The evil face spun before my eyes, growing dimmer as my strength ebbed away. I knew I should swim, should fight to reach the shore, but my limbs felt like lead. The darkness of the pool swallowed me, pulling me down into its depths. And then only darkness and silence remained, broken by the triumphant hiss.
Jack. Liza and Henry were driving through a wooded, empty stretch of highway when the storm unleashed its fury. Lightning cracked the sky, thunder bellowed like an angry god, and the heavens opened, drenching the world in a deluge.
We'd better stop,
Liza said, her voice tight with anxiety. Henry nodded, his face pale in the intermittent flashes of lightning. He pressed the brakes, but the car slid, tires losing their grip on the slick, rain-slicked pavement. They careened off the road, tumbling down a small incline, coming to a shuddering halt. Henry's hands were trembling as he turned to Liza.
"Are you okay?"
he asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. She nodded, her eyes wide and frightened. Henry exhaled sharply, then peered through the rain-soaked windows.
"I'm going to see how bad it is,"
he said, opening the door and stepping into the tempest. Liza watched his blurred figure move through the headlights, a phantom in the rain. Moments later, he returned, drenched and shivering.
The car's not too damaged, but we're stuck in the mud,
he said, his voice grim.
I'll have to go for help.
Liza's heart pounded in her chest. She knew there would be no quick rescue here. Henry instructed her to turn off the headlights and lock the doors until he returned. As he trudged away, she felt a cold dread settle over her. Axe, murder, hollow. The name whispered through her mind like a dark incantation. Though Henry hadn't spoken it, she knew he was thinking the same thing. This was the place where a man, driven mad by jealousy, had hacked his wife to death with an axe. Legend had it that his vengeful spirit still haunted this forsaken stretch of road. Outside, the storm raged on. Liza heard a shriek, a loud thump, and a ghastly gurgling noise. She strained to see through the darkness, but the world beyond the windows was a blur of rain and shadows. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she sank lower in her seat, her ears straining to catch every sound. Then she heard it, a soft, rhythmic bumping. Bump, bump, bump. It was as if something was being tossed by the wind, thudding gently against the car. A blinding light suddenly filled the interior. An authoritative voice commanded her to exit the vehicle. Relief flooded through her. Henry must have found help. She unlocked the door and stepped out, squinting against the glare. As her eyes adjusted, she saw it. Henry's body hung upside down from a tree, his throat slashed so deeply that his head was nearly severed. The wind swung his lifeless form, causing it to thump against the trunk. Bump, bump, bump. A scream tore from Liza's throat as she stumbled towards the light. But as she neared, she realized it wasn't a flashlight illuminating the night. A figure stood bathed in an eerie glow, smiling with chilling delight. In his hand he held a large, solid, and all-too-real axe. Liza backed away, her eyes fixed on the ghostly figure.
"Playing around when my back was turned,"
he whispered, his voice a low, menacing growl. He stroked the axe blade lovingly.
"You've been very naughty."
The last thing Liza saw was the glint of the axe in the ghostly light before it descended.